This is Duke University.
Thank you for inviting me to be a part of this group. And what I'm presenting today is very much work in progress. So I'll actually show you some work in progress slides of me trying to visualize the data that I'm working with. And I'm also obviously going to be taking you back in time, well over 1,000 years. I'll try and weave in some images that show the kinds of primary sources I can work with. But what I want to do first of all is introduce you to my own projects and how those developed into something much larger, which is to try to recreate or reconstruct a total network. All of the intellectuals that are working in the 8th through 9th centuries, which is the Carolingian period, named for Charlemagne. So what I'm going to do for a minute or two is just take you through what I actually do, and then we can think about what I'm trying to do now with this data. So this was the man that I have done most of my research on so far, and this image of him is taken from a 9th century manuscript. He was Rabanus Maurus, born in about 780, died in 856. He was the abbot of Fulda, 822 to 842, and then raised to the Archbishop of Mainz in 847, held that position till he died in 856. And I'm putting up this data here because it already shows some of the complexities of the data we have. We don't know exactly when he was born. And also these labels that we have for him, Abbot of Fulda, which is a monastery, it was on the eastern fringes of the Carolingian Empire. It was a missionary monastery when it was founded. So this notion of him as Abbot of Fulda and also Archbishop of Mainz are these labels that we give to our to the people that we work on. And I want to talk about some of the problems, not necessarily for Rabanus, but for some of the other intellectuals, of having one label that dominates their entire careers. And that's something that's conceptually the way medievalists talk about our intellectuals, our figures, but it's actually more complex than that when we're trying to get at their total network and how they may have been much more integrated into much larger circles, but I'll come on to that. So the work I've done for a large part of my career is to edit this particular text. I've done other things, but the text that links me to Rabanus is a sermon collection that he wrote in the 820s that covers the liturgical year and then has a section that is on the virtues and vices, which is what attracted me to the text, because it has people throwing things at the moon, it has pigs getting upset at eclipses and things like that. So it's got some really interesting social history material in it, and I edited that part for my PhD dissertation, and then in the years since have worked on the rest. And this is one manuscript of it. And these manuscripts, this one in particular, Munich has digitized a lot of its early material. You can go in and you can read them online. This is the 10th century manuscript I have of this sermon collection. So what I'm dealing with as an editor of a text is to collect all the available manuscript data, go through it, read it, it's all in Latin, and this is actually not too difficult a script. It's a Carolingian minuscule, which are the letter forms that are the basis of our own alphabet today. It was revived by the Humanists in the late 14th, 15th century. It's basically our text today. So this particular era of manuscript isn't difficult to read if you're trained to do it. But this is the sort of material I work with. I collect all of the texts that I can get from manuscripts, and then I collate them, and I decide, and this is a very traditional way of establishing an edition of a text, I decide which is the best reading at any given moment, and that becomes the text that we print. So that's the process of making this kind of material available in the modern world in printed editions, but it goes through these steps of trying to decide what the text should be, because any handwritten document introduces errors. So there are people who would keep every manuscript separate as its own unique document, but there's also an argument, just for the case of readability and accessibility, of trying to combine the different texts into one so that we arrive at what may be the best reading, and we use that as scholars in the modern world. So that's the kind of work I do. This is my only joke, but this is the beginning of the network, because Urbanus made this sermon collection for Heisdorf of Mainz, and I put this Lego Heisdorf up there because I don't know what Heisdorf looked like, and I don't want to pretend that I do. This is a picture of Urbanus that's roughly contemporary, but this I don't know. But what's interesting, we were talking yesterday about the way we are networked online, the algorithms for what come up when you search for different things. I did a search for Heisdorf of Mainz, and in the first several images, they were of me. So it connects me with this guy in ways I never expected. But I didn't put a picture of me up there. So this is the beginning of a network. And what interested me as I started to think about the context for Urbanus' work, he gave the sermon collection to Heisdorf, but we have a letter collection surviving from him that shows that he actually wrote many more books, different sorts of books. He was one of the specialists in writing biblical commentaries, Old and New Testament commentaries, and those were often commissioned from him, or he would send them as gifts that would establish a connection. So we can reconstruct, just from his letters, this network here, which I've made, and Eric helped me with this software, but it's with Gephi, so I can make this network, and you can see that he is just one small part of it. So what started to interest me is not just this connection. As an editor of this text written for him, I'm wondering if I know more about his entire network, whether I can think about the distribution of my text more broadly, because we know the other people that he's communicating with. So this was a seed of the idea to think about a bigger network, to see how he's connected intellectually, because I'm interested in the distribution of my text in the first instance, who's getting it. So this is one kind of network diagram that helps me conceptualize that. This one, and this was a custom map, and I've added more places onto it, but it's a piece of Carolingian Europe, and you can see here's Fulda up on the eastern edge, and what I've done here is tried to think about his network, so he's spreading out from there, and I've geolocated him, and we can pretty securely place Urbanus for most of his career up in Fulda, and Mainz is just to the west. We can see him operating from there, but what happens if we think about the scholars and intellectuals that are at these other places, who have their own networks? How are these going to intersect? And this isn't something people in my field try to do very much, I think because the data is vast and quite complex, and I'm just trying to work through now some of the ways in which we can interpret the material evidence that survives for us to think about multiple networks like this and linking them up. So this is a very quick overview of the big project, but what I've done to try to get into it more in recent months is to, and this is available in my post, so this is what I'm talking about in the post that's now online, and many of these images are also in there. But what I wanted to do was look at how we medievalists do networks. How do we look at our data? What do we select? What are we trying to do? How are we reconstructing networks with what we have? And what I did was I looked at many different studies. I sampled different scholars, not enjoying their work, but also with a critical eye to seeing what's the network that emerges when I look at the data they've used in discussing friendship or relationships between individuals, all kinds of different themes, but there's a network that underlies the story that's being told. So I interrogated for the post, and I'm using the material again here, 2 different studies. And that was one step. And as I was doing that, I realized that actually I wanted to be, we're building a database, we're trying to make a database, but what it will need is the raw data, which in this particular case are the letters, the letter collections that survive from the early medieval period. And we have several. They vary in size, but for the moment, the evidence I'm talking about, just to be clear, to reconstruct the networks I'm making at the moment, are from letter collections. That's the only type of source I'm using at the moment. And the studies that I used to think about how we are talking about networks as medievalists is this one, and both of these are great. I'm not going to try to say that I want to criticize what they set out to do, but I'm very interested in the nuts and bolts, the structure of what they're doing. But this one is John Contraini, and I'll refer to it as Contraini from now on. But he wrote, and you can see here, the Carolingian School, Letters from the Classroom. And I like this piece because he brings in a lot of characters, a lot of intellectuals that often are marginalized, or you see their names in footnotes. But he tried to get a broad sweep from the late 8th century through the 9th of scholars and their students, teachers, students, schoolmasters talking to each other in letters, writing letters to each other, which is how we establish that they have a connection and the sort of connection they have. So I like this piece because it shows us a wide selection of people. And it appeared, and I think this is important to point out, it appeared in a volume that was about one particular scholar, Giovanni Scotto, John Scotus, right? And if you read the posts, you'll see how that skewed the way he presented his network a little bit, because he couldn't actually talk about John Scott in relation to anybody because he's a very important philosopher, early medieval philosopher, but we can't connect him with anybody. We can't place him. We don't really know when he was entirely, right? So we have a lot of uncertainty around John Scott. Some of his works survive, but we know very little about the man himself in order to be able to connect him. But John Scott is mentioned a lot in John Contraini's article at the beginning and the end to frame, to introduce the topic and then to kind of bookend the other end. But we don't know anything about John Scott. So that's one piece, and the other is very recent, and really we can't talk about medieval networks, intellectual networks now, without engaging with this volume, which is monumental. It's well over 1,000 pages. Sita Städtekulturen des Lebens, which is the intellectual culture in the early and high Middle Ages. So she's actually doing a broad sweep, starting in the early medieval period, which is my period, 8th and 9th centuries, and then looking at slices of intellectual culture, 10th into the 11th century, or is it, yeah, 10th to 11th, and then 12th century, so looking at particular periods, and I was very interested in the 500 or so pages she spends on intellectual networks, which is really what she's trying to reconstruct. So we can't talk about intellectual networks without using this volume. So I needed to think about the way she's actually reconstructing her networks and what her project looks like, because this is the latest, biggest piece of information on it that she's put out.
So Claire, with these articles and with the scholarship that you do, you're talking about networks and you're going to be looking at context through letters. Is there a focus in the articles on like actual influence of ideas going back and forth? Is it just to kind of construct what the relationships were, or is there evidence that like people were really changing each other's minds and influencing each other's writings?
This is her business concept, and what Steckel in particular is interested in an abstract notion of knowledge transmission. Wissensvermittlung, I think she called it. So it is abstract. So it's this notion that this knowledge is being exchanged, but she's not giving it any kind of physical or material context. And that's not the way she wants to use the material. What she is trying to do is think about relationships, how connections are made, so that she can then use the texts themselves to think about how culture is transmitted, intellectual culture. Contraini is using letters to think about different sorts of themes, to think about quality of relationships. Steckel does that too. So network scholarship for the medieval period is dominated by 2 or 3 themes, which are to think about the language of friendship quite often. How do people talk to each other? How close is the relationship? That's actually very difficult to unpack, because if you read even just the letters that I've looked at for this talk, one individual can shift between a formal and an informal address within the same letter. So how do you interpret that? It's very difficult. But that's one of the things we try to do. And also, how are these connections established? Sheppel wants to think about that in different stages, as I'll show you, and I'll break down the way she reconstructs Urbanus' network. So I will say that Contraini is not setting out to reconstruct a network, but his data, if you capture it, is a network, which is what I wanted to look at. You know, how representative is it of the sorts of scholars that we're working with? Sheppel is trying to reconstruct networks. But this is all what I'm calling text-based. There are no diagrams in her book, no maps or anything. So it is very much, we're working with concepts of network and transmission of knowledge in an abstract sense, right? And the ways that she approaches the topic. So what I want to show you next is my process in looking at these studies, and also I've already mentioned that I wanted to go back to the primary sources and gather data from those myself. So there were two stages that we've been working on in the last couple of months. So I wanted to work through the article by Contraini and the book, pieces of this book anyway, and try to think of, if I extract their raw material, the data, the letters they're using, that establish connection, can I make a network diagram out of it? And some of these extra things that often, if you're talking in an abstract way about transmission of knowledge, you're not always concerned with where are these people? You know, how much distance separates them? Does that matter? So I wanted to geolocate them. We've already seen an example of that with the Tableau map. And also, and this is because we're trying to think of what sort of database to build. So we have nodes that are the intellectuals, the edges in the network diagrams. What is the connection? Now, for most of what I show you, it's a letter that's connecting them. But we could, in fact, think of other sorts of connections. Is the person, are they related? Are they blood relations? That's very common. So other sorts of relationship could be encoded. So that's something I tried to do. And then gathering data directly from the primary sources, not from the manuscripts, but from editions of the letters. Right? These exist in largely 19th century critical editions published by Monumenta Germaniae Historica, which is a long series of historical documents for Germany, but actually Germany in the sense of a much larger Frankish era for the early medieval period. So it covers some of the authors that I look at that are now in France, right? So they're included in this set. So I was going back to that, and I'll show you some of the files I've made, and can show you some of the ways we're trying to think about what we want to extract in order to map what we have. But first of all, here are some process images. So this is literally, I drew it out. This is Steckel's book. It's a big Kulturen des Lebens volume. And what I've done here, and it's color-coded, and maybe it's not extremely clear, but you can see green and pink and purple, and there's also kind of teal blue in there. What this represents, all kinds of things, but I took 3 or 4 sections of her book where she's looking at Urbanus' network. This is all from Urbanus, my man, so I put him in the center. But the different colors indicate what the part of his network that she's looking at and trying to reconstruct in any given point of the book. So what you get, and I'll show this to you again in a much more sleek form later, is a fractured network. Your experience of reading the book fractures his network. You can't see the whole thing, you see a piece. And what she is doing is giving us a little bit of a sense of a change or an evolution in his network over time, a little bit, right? So we get the early part of his career, but then she becomes more thematic in terms of describing a network created by giving books, which could actually span different phases in his career. So there is a time element with her work, but not strictly. So this shows all of her data mapped like this. And what I've done is I've marked the edges, which shows that well, let me look at the diagram, the diamond shapes first, because these indicate a book or a text that links them. If there isn't a diamond in there, then these are statements effectively that Steckel, and she's not wrong, I mean, we believe this, but stating what the connection is. So we know that Alfred taught Rabanus, and we know that Rabanus was a pupil at Tours, right, the monastery of Tours. So I've labelled some of the edges with some of the other sorts of information she gives us. So that was the first step in the process, to get a big piece of paper and just draw on it, different coloured pens. This is a very clunky diagram, but this is the next step. And this is Contraini's data. This is the other article, and shows you what I was trying to do from the start, and you can see it also in this first hand-drawn one, trying to put people, have keep in my head a map of Carolingian Europe, and I don't have a perfect idea of that, but to try to already start to place people and geolocate them in thinking about how I arrange them in this kind of diagram. So you can see it's a little bit clearer just because it's not my handwriting. So here, roughly, where all these places are. I've kept John Scott in at this point, John Scottus. We don't know where he was, except he was attached to some royal courts. Maybe try to link him with them. But everybody else I've put close to the place we tend to associate them with, so that I can see them geographically located. And then these, for Contraini, all he's using are letters. So all of these edges are a letter that links these characters. So this was an early phase of the network diagram. This is a much nicer version with a Tableau map, a custom Tableau map underneath.
Tableau is a piece of software for doing data visualization, so it allows you pretty easily to explore data. I want to pipe in, before you go on with a lot of the details, one of the things that's fascinated me as Claire's presented this, you know, I'm trying to understand her language, I'm trying to understand her data. Through that, I'm trying to help her then figure out how to encode it in a flexible manner, in a way that she can ask different questions of it, understand it in new ways, compile data from different sources. But you know, if you back up 2 slides to the original hand-drawn one, and this, I think this is really fascinating. One of the things that Claire's been pointing out along the way is that, you know, I do data visualization. This means a lot to me, that when you change the form of some data, the form in which it's presented, you potentially open up very new understandings. You open up new ways of seeing where there might be gaps, where how complete or incomplete it is. And so I love that she went through this process of taking from the text. Like she said, there's no diagrams in this book, even though they're trying to, you know, the scholar, she's trying to talk about networks. She doesn't try to make a network diagram, which would just be a different way of looking at it. And so taking that from the page and from the long form text and trying to put it in this form of a network, or then trying to put it in the form of a database, and it really changes how you see it. It forces you to look at how, how accurate are the data, or how narrowed down are the dates, or how much are they talking about places and times, and so I love personally this process of changing the form of the information from the long form text to the diagram, and seeing how that impacts your understanding of the information.
Yeah, the process is eye-opening, just to see how we talk about something, and just making this made me, as Eric says, see gaps. Wonder about certain things, ask why doesn't she include this person, or why this selection of people. So
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. So we made this for Contraini, which it's just a bit easier to read. And what you see already emerging are these networks, these little clusters of activity around what I would call the usual suspects. For early medieval studies, if we're thinking about scholars and teachers and intellectuals, three names always pop out, and they do it here. I didn't rig this to do this, this is what happened. Alcuin is one of the most famous teachers, was Charlemagne's teacher in a way. So he's an Anglo-Saxon that moved from England to the continent and got sucked into Charlemagne's entourage and then became a very, very influential advisor and teacher at the court. And people came to study with him, both at the court, most likely in Aachen, all the way up there, and then he received the Abbacy of Tours, monastery down here, and people came to him there. So people travel, which you can't understand from this map. There's movement, things shift. But so he's one of the usual suspects. Rabanus was his student, and Contraini just has 3 Rabanus letters. Right? That's all he uses. You've already seen my diagram that shows how many Rabanus wrote, but Contraini just uses 3. And then we have Lupus of Ferrières, and Lupus was Rabanus' student. So we have this nice scholarly genealogy in the family tree. They don't connect on this side. Maybe because many of us all know this, we don't have to explore those connections. And this is what I like about Contraini's article, is that he's introducing us to some people I never think about. Right? They're in the picture, I like that. But I look at this as a medievalist and think, wait, these 3 are very intimately connected, but we're not reading that from this iteration of the data. And also, one of the things, and you could go to my post to see the video I made to break this down by decade. But this is all the data, and the way that Contraini uses this data to talk about scholarship, explores themes, and also kind of mashes it up so that he can, and I should have actually made a diagram for this for the post, but I had this notion of making a kind of graph which has on the y-axis the date, so 820s, 830s, 840s, and the x-axis would be the point in Contraini's article where a scholar mentioned corresponding with that date, and it would be like that. You know, he moves about a lot because Alcuin, these are 3 generations. Our usual suspects are 3 generations of scholar. And then we have more recent scholars up here, Christian of Stavelot. He was originally of Corby, right? So he's up the top there. The names in red are writers. They're the ones sending the letters. The names in green are the ones receiving them. These guys here, students of Alcuin, we don't know where to place them for the most part. This royal nun probably should be in Aachen, but with a change of ruler, she got put into a convent in Poitiers. So she's more or less in the right place for a certain part of her career. So we've got, sorry, go ahead. Just
so you know, at this point, Claire is doing a lot of this by hand. Okay, she's taking stuff from the sources. I generated a map for her of some of the main places from the geocoding that she did, but then she's drawing these diagrams by hand and trying to put it out. And so this is this painstaking,
took so long.
Yeah, this painstaking process of laying this out. What we're hoping to do is get to a point where the data is in a form and we have some visualization tools so that you can explore this more interactively and see some of these aspects. But she's having to do a lot of work by hand to generate this. And then hopefully we'll be able to do some of this stuff that she's talking about. All this time is being mashed into one diagram here that really these people are separated in time and these connections are separated in time. And so if we can make some tools that might allow us to set a time window and slide it and see how the network changes over time, that's going to be a big step from the long-form text where all the argument was mashed together to a diagram that's all mashed together, and then try to pull this apart.
Yeah. So here, this is very hard to read, but it's in Excel format. This is the primary sources that I'm extracting data from. And I'm going to skip to the more close-up view of the subject lines here, because this has been very interesting to work out what sort of data I need to capture. And I'm working already with layers, and I want to retain a record of the different layers of work on these texts. So I've got the author, and I've standardized his name, right? But there are different spellings of his name. I've not even thought about that yet, but a database needs to have a capacity to think about that. But what I have in columns C and D are the label that the editor gives to that person. So that's a 19th century, and I mean, still agree, probably, if we're going to label this person. You can see this is the beginning of his letter collection. He's a deacon, then he's a magister, he's a teacher at Fulda, and then he's abbot of Fulda for this early stage of his career. But these are labels that the editor has put on the letter before we get to the letter itself. E is what, we're getting into the letter itself now. This is what Rabanus calls himself. And you can get at all kinds of things by looking at that data, but he's calling himself a servant, a sinner, a priest. So this is a more formal letter. I think, I'm a priest. I don't know who he's writing to. Oh, he's writing to the Archbishop of Mainz. So they have different ways of labeling themselves. And then F and G are the editor's labels for the recipients. And sometimes that's involved a bit of interpretation and a bit of work because the letter might not identify them. But the editor who knows the context might be able to say, this must be to so-and-so, right? So some of that is an interpretation or a supplying of evidence by later scholars. It's not always evident from the letter itself. And then this line here, so J and K, I'm trying here to capture the degree of familiarity. For Rabanus' letters, I don't know that I'm going to be able to use that. It's been very interesting, but he shifts between the two. It's not, it can seem like a nice casual or familiar letter, and then he will shift to something more formal at different parts of the letter. That needs thinking about.
So you're using the way that he's referring to people,
yes,
the two involves.
Two involves and cognate words. And then the dates have been very interesting because sometimes we know more or less precisely. In fact, all of these, we know the date. Oh no, we've got a date range here, right? So sometimes we have a date range, sometimes we can pinpoint a more exact date, although these are approximate, here. So dates are going to be interesting to try to keep track of, and of course these are the dates according to one scholar. We have other secondary material, other studies of this material by modern scholars that we disagree about the dates. So we have to somehow collect all those different disagreements in a database, revise them, or think about that problem somehow.
Yeah, so at this point it's kind of the first pass of seeing what sort of data does she want to record, and then all these subtleties will ideally be recorded as well. Some of the information about who made these decisions, the different types of names, how definitely you know the dates, and it's these multiple passes to try to build up what they call the model of the data, so that you're really modeling something that doesn't lose any information but puts it in a flexible enough form that then you can play around with it later.
Yeah. So I'm going to just realize that I can always fill an hour, but I'm going to get through my pictures. These are just two files that show the format to import data into the Gephi software so that you arrive at this view of Contrain's data, which again shows us the network more cleanly perhaps than the map, and I put these stars around our usual suspects, but you can see the clusters of their network. What I'm going to show you now are visualizations of pieces of Steckel, now I've got here, so she's breaking it down by time. I can move through these fairly quickly because I think I've already dealt with some of the issues here. But this is for an early phase of his career. I'm trying to capture movement and also not just what he wrote, which are these red arrows, compositions by Rabanus, but things written for him that help us establish relationship. We can bring another scholar into the picture, Theodulf, a Visigoth, who was again part of Charlemagne's entourage for a while, and then was given the bishopric of Orleans. So that's possible. Knowing that Rabanus is connected with him, does that connect Rabanus with Orleans, with Theodulf and with Orleans, with a different centre? So that was the years 790s to 821, when Rabanus was made abbot at Fulda in 822, and actually have taken this right the way through to his death. This is a selection of letters that Steckel chooses to talk about. And what I want to digress at the moment here, but I promise you I'd do this, is to think about the problem. One of the problems I have is I'm trying trying to geolocate people, but I'm going to use this guy here, Hildeman, of Saint-Denis, to understand why that's problematic and why it closes down the total picture of Hildeman's network and anybody connected with him. Because we can put Hildeman at Saint-Denis, but actually he was, for one emperor, Louis the Pious, he was the arch-chaplain, which would have taken him to court. He was very, very politically well-connected, this man, very important and influential man. And I have no idea how much time he spent at Saint-Denis as abbot, because people were always writing to him to intercede with the king. So he must have been at court a lot. So we can put him in Saint-Denis, but, and this is very clunky, but these are actually his connections. He was abbot of Saint-Denis, but he was also abbot of Saint-Germain-des-Prés, Saint-Médard, Salon, Saint-Ouen of Rouen. He was at the court, probably quite a lot, as arch-chaplain, and then for the next ruler, Lothar, Louis' son, he was arch-chancellor. So he retained political activity, he kept being very politically active. But we also have these places up the top. Cologne, he was Archbishop of Cologne. And he was, at one point, he fell out of favour and was exiled to Colby. He died, and I have no idea why, but he died in Prüm, not in any of his other monasteries, but that's where he died. And one of the things that underlies a network like this with Saint-Denis, Corby, Prüm, these all belong to what is called a monastic confraternity, a prayer community. So there are networks that underlie the associations that we have for Hildeman. But he's associated with all these places at one or more points of his life. How do we represent that, and how do we bring the possibility for that wider network into our thinking about how everybody connects and how material is disseminated, which is where the question I started out with. So, another thing, selectivity. This is Steckel. We've seen this before. It's her, the letters she chooses to think about his intellectual network. These are the people he gifts books to, writes commentaries for. And this is in the post, so you can look at this at greater length. But I've circled the people that were included in that diagram I've just shown you. You can see how many more there were. And the relationship with these others that have no circles around them is no different to the ones she selected. The purplish circles are all members of the royal family. And what we're seeing here, I think, is the influence of important recent scholarship in thinking about Urbanus' connection with royals and writing books for royal families, people from royal families. And that skews the data. It's good, we've had a study of that, so it's included when Steckel writes her piece on these intellectual networks. But we could have talked about these other people too. Right? So that's a more complete picture of what survived anyway of his letters. This just sums up some of the things I've been saying to you already, but what I will pull out here is that what I've noticed, it comes out really clearly in Steckel's work, is that what we get, even in a book that's about networks, intellectual networks in a very big sense, what we are actually getting is a series of egocentric networks. So she's not actually linking up Urbanus. She talks about Alcuin and Lupus too, our two other main people I've been showing you. She has sections for them, but these don't link up. Right? She talks about one network, and she talks about another, and she talks about somebody else's network. And these can all be connected. And that's something I want to fight against with this project, is this idea that if we're going to talk about networks, we put one guy in the center and it's his network, and then we move on to somebody else and think about a different network. Yes?
It's one of the things that I'm curious about in all the diagrams that you showed. There's a source, and there's this, but I haven't seen any overlap.
Right.
And I'm curious, was it because the limit of information and how it's disseminated? Was it
no,
the
there are overlaps. There are overlaps. So what I'm showing you is the way that we are doing networks now, which is to focus on usually the richest data sources, which are the letter collections of the three men that whose names I've been, Alcuin, Lupus, Urbanus. These have three of the largest letter collections surviving. So we go to that data and we can reconstruct their networks. but we are selective in the way we choose to use the data and in the stories we want to tell from it. So it can happen that there's no connection.
When you think of a sphere of influence, and you think of these points on the map, and you say, how did they influence each other in a historical context? It's really kind of another piece of the puzzle in a way.
It is, and we can make the connections, and I'll show you in a moment. This is how. By merging individual networks. So this was my first attempt at that. Here is Rabanus with all of his sphere. Here is Lupus, who has a bigger letter collection. I forget exactly how many now, but it's here. And you can start to see they connect. They both write to him. They connect with another very important figure. Right? And these are just using letters. It's just using one type of source. Alcuin I have not mapped properly. I tried to cheat a bit, and I think I might have included connection because he does connect. I can't see it in this version. But his letter collection is the largest we have, so there's 300 letters. And they are not just 300 individual, separate people. He writes to certain people more than others. He has friends that he writes to a lot. So I haven't tried to map his into that, but when I do, I'm not sure how much will connect with Lupus's because they're two generations apart. But his isn't all in there. But for Lupus and Rabanus, this is the complete data set from their letter collections. So if you were to study it a bit more, you could see, I'm not sure if this is in the post, but maybe it is. You can see that there are overlaps there. But that's only one source. So what I want to do next is layer in other types of evidence, and particularly thinking about the material and the physical evidence, because this is what gets most overlooked. Manuscripts, which is again a point where I started in thinking about networks. If we look at the earliest copies, and there are lots of problems associated with this type of data because there are lots of uncertainties, and that we need to start thinking about in terms of visualization. But what I have here, I made this video a year ago. What I've done here, this is on Google Maps. These are 9 of Rabanus's commentaries, not all commentaries, some of them are the types of work, but 9 pieces of his work observed. I've taken just the earliest manuscripts, so 9th, 10th, maybe into the 11th century. Once you get into the 12th century, everything goes wild. There's a lot more, we have more data surviving, and it's also different sorts of networks in the 12th century. So I wanted to try to use some of the earliest ones. In fact, actually, these may only be 9th century. If I remember, I made this a while ago. These might just be the 9th century manuscripts. So I'm trying to get as contemporary as I can with the actual composition of the text and see if I can map, not just for one, as a text editor, we have to construct a diagram of how the manuscripts we use connect. And that's called the stemma codicum, and I have an image if anybody wants to see. It's not geolocated. But we usually work in terms of one text and its manuscripts. So what I'm doing here is not usually done, and certainly not mapped, is to layer different manuscript distributions over each other and see if patterns emerge, and in fact they do. You can see here, Reichenau and St. Gall, Salzburg, a little bit St. Emma, Fulda, of course, will probably acquire. This is where we lose a lot of data, because manuscripts this early don't always survive. Fulda would have had copies of everything he wrote, but those copies don't all survive. But we see clusters emerging that I think show, and no, this is proving something that was argued many years ago and then disproved by another scholar in a big argument about whether we can talk about the circulation of manuscripts within confraternities. And one scholar, Rosamund McKittrick, many years ago argued that she thought library catalogues were circulating in confraternities. I think that was her argument. That was shot down by somebody, Don Buller, who said, no evidence. And then maybe not the library catalogue, perhaps, but the books, Rabanus's books, seem to go to Reichenau, St. Gall, St. Emma, Fulda, are all, and Saint Denis as well, are all within the same confraternity network. So that's something that needs thinking about. But I wouldn't have had that if I hadn't tried to go through this process of layering different manuscript distributions. So another step, and this is where it gets very interesting, but a little bit more speculative, is to think about the roots. So here we have, going back to Steckel's diagram, we have this correspondence between Rabanus in Fulham and Frécault of Lisieux, Bishop of Lisieux, and he describes himself as being in the Wild West. Right? So they have this little thing going in the 6 letters that they exchange about how out of the way he is, and Rabanus says, oh, but I'm in the middle of the desert. Right? So, but look at the distance between them. Nobody thinks about this. You know, we think about the letters being exchanged, and we don't always try to give it a physical or a material, a geographical kind of reality. And we need to put this back in, largely because we can actually, through tools like Orbis, we can map possible routes. So I played with this a night or 2 ago, and what Orbis does, is anybody familiar with Orbis, which is a Stanford mapping system for the Roman world, but what it has in its database, it went live about a year ago, I think, are all the Roman roads. Now, if you've got a lovely Roman road, you're still going to use it in a medieval period, and it's still connecting some of the most important towns. So I think it's safe for early medievalists to use this, to think through how you get from A to B using this tool. And you can select how you want to do it. So I think this was a road and river, because it can send you sea routes are cheapest. And rivers you will use whenever possible. So I've included rivers and roads, but it generated some routes that were sea. So you go up the coast, and I didn't select those in the end to show you. But what's interesting here, I've got as close to Lisieux as I can. This is actually for one. You have to know the Latin names, but the internet's great for that. And I've got as far as Mainzia, Mogontiacum. Fulda is a little bit further east. But the places I've been to that you would probably go through are Paris, Amiens, Soissons, Duracotorum is Reims, Paris, Divodurum is Metz, and Trier, and then Mainz. And these are all really, really important centres with intellectuals and monasteries and cathedrals. And some of the people we've looked at are housed in some of these centres. Hildeman, Abbot of Saint-Médard, which is in Soissons, right? So if you are, and this journey takes, how long? 21.9 days. In May, I think I chose a month to travel, just randomly in May. And I think we were on horseback, maybe in private journey. You can choose all these. But you're going to have to stop. Where do you stop? Who do you stay with? What do you exchange when you're there? And is it possible to think about some of our manuscripts, because all of Rabanus's letters accompany books, so they're making these journeys. So what happens, this is speculative, but I want to think about it. If I'm making this journey and I stop off in Soissons, and I talk to people and I say, look what I've got with me, and they say, well, can we have a copy? You know, is this one of the ways that knowledge is transmitted in a very physical way, material contact? So that was my final slide, and I might let Eric also help me to, in the final minutes, think about what we're trying to do. I guess my message is that we have to layer different sorts of data. We have to make this capture as many different ways to think about networks as possible, and we have to do this using digital tools that can help us manage this large data set, visualize it in different ways.
And then have the flexibility to think about not only the network itself, but think about it in terms of space, maybe consider the space and be able to go back and forth between representations that really take the space into account or not, take into account time, so you can see how these things change over time. And so when you have this flexibility, you can not only be layering a lot of different data sources, but then you can be looking at them flexibly in a way that can really, I think it really will change the understanding of what the networks were, what they could have been, and how they were built up.
And I'm hoping I can recover some of the marginal figures, so that we're actually mapping them, or showing, because what I suspect will happen is that we'll move away from individuals to thinking about centres, who was there, who else was there. So it might be that Rabanus writes to a particular person, but there's a school there, and there are other important intellectuals there. And so you've got to imagine that the centre houses a range of people, and that the network is a little bit more complicated for that reason, that we have to move it beyond A writes to B, and think about what is actually happening on the ground as much as we can. Any other questions? I realise I've talked for
Just quickly, have you looked at the Matching the Republic of Letters project at Stanford? Have you gotten any?
No.
Yeah, so Dan Edelstein is doing a large collaborative project on mapping the Republic of Letters, which is obviously enormous because the 18th century letter writing is enormous, but has different problems because dating and authorship are less difficult and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know a whole lot about that project, but you might get some.
That's something I'll look at that, and it reminds me actually that I have been looking at, there are some later medievalists that are making networks through letters, and I have been looking at some of their work. I don't know that any of it, they're online with it, and they have websites and they're interacting. I don't know that they have any interactive visualizations available, but I know that letter collections in the 12th century, it's very popular.
The Republic of Letters stuff, I think, is partly amazing too because they document some different generations of their iterations of trying to visualize these things and different projects that have spun off of it. And so you can really see, some things they're trying that didn't necessarily work as well. Some look really nice, but it's harder to get insight. And they have now it's been around for long enough that they have a couple of generations of projects that have been based on this data, and so I think it's a wonderful resource for that, and it's great that they're documenting some of that process online as well.
And they're lucky to have some data.
Well, I mean, it's funny because this is in collaboration with Franco Moretti, obviously, and his quantitative work in humanities, and it's fewer people than one would think. I mean, it looks like a huge project, but it always comes down to people like you, actually.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating, speaking as a medievalist myself. And I wonder, in your experience working with the material culture, working with the manuscripts themselves, do these networks leave their trace on the manuscript, this journey from intellectual center to intellectual center in terms of script or style of illumination?
Yeah, so we can go inside the manuscripts themselves and then there may be marginal notes. I think for this period it's rarer to be able to harvest a lot of extra information that way about the journey itself. What we can get, we can study the movement of the books themselves and where they were copied. If we can understand that, we can identify that. I would only get a percentage on the number of times we're able to say this was written here and when. That's part of the study of periodically. But so we can say quite often where it was written and when, roughly. And then we can say, and it was given to this place because we have a book, a library record in there saying it belongs to us, whatever. So we can map it that way. And that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because in making the this map, I had to make a lot of decisions about, I was trying to choose its earliest home, rather than where it was made. For some of the manuscripts, we have some contemporary with Varus made, and in fact, some of the books, in Honorum Sanctae Crucis, is this incredible poem, pictures made out of text and poems. He wrote that very early in his life, but he started to circulate it when he had the power to do so, which was once he was abbot and then Archbishop of Mainz, when he had copies made at Fulda. This became the gift book from Fulda. And Mainz too, there's a Mainz scriptorium, a writing centre that makes some of these. So we know that some of the copies of this were made in it's line, right? Okay. So we know that some were made in Fulda, but that's not what I want to record here. I want to know where they made it for, so that I get the sense of its earliest home. And sometimes we know that information, but a lot of the time we don't. And that's a problem with working with manuscripts and with uncertainty that any of us working, especially with pre-modern material, we have a lot of uncertainty. a lot of choices, a lot of interpretation. And that has to, there's nothing in here that alerts you to the fact that I'm guessing for something else, right? You look at blurry, maybe.
So. And it also needs to get encoded with the data. This, that scholarship where what is the history of the scholarship and who made some of those decisions needs to get encoded with the data.
The database needs to be capturing that too, yes.
And this is fascinating work. I'm thinking that this is a very interesting period because it's a period in which written culture is still pre-print. And so it's really immersed in what is primarily an oral culture. So we have a culture of writing in manuscripts, but it's embedded in oral communication, face-to-face networks, and actual process of reproducing manuscripts apparently was embedded in kind of still a primary orality of sort of talking over the text and so forth. So what I'm thinking is that we look back at that from a print-based or even a digital text standpoint of history, and we sort of think about the networks in that sense. And I think, so I guess the question is, do you see the letters and the sharing of manuscripts as being driven by a kind of oral face-to-face network of people who are at common places, common events? Or is it the flip side of that? Because I think today we find people with common interests because Google Scholar suggests that we might also like to read so-and-so's work, or there are other ways of composing our face-to-face networks through analyzing our digital networks.
We have evidence for both.
Sorry?
So we have evidence for both ways in which knowledge about the work. I mean, just to focus on this kind of evidence, books and letters, we have Hildeman met a Fulden monk at court and heard about Urbanus writing something and said, I want something from you. So that's face-to-face, and we know about it because the letter recorded it, but that was transmission of the fact that a book existed through face-to-face contact and a chance meeting at court. We have evidence for that. The other evidence we have, again, just within Urbanus' collection, is of an assistant bishop, a Episcopus, I think he then became bishop of, I don't say Woodstock. But he had read one of Urbanus' things, and so this is where he sees the material once more. So the book is prompting him, the ability to read one of Urbanus' books in mind, maybe write to Urbanus and say, could you send me more of what you have?
But this is the first moment in history when this is becoming possible, right? Because manuscripts are being copied and saved, and otherwise you're talking about the networks being shaped by an entourage. You mentioned Charlemagne's entourage, so I know the other people who are in that entourage and the other people we meet as we travel around.
Yes, so this is what I'm trying to capture, how people that knew each other, that we can get at that evidence in different ways. But I started with letters, but there are other ways to try to capture who knows who. Yeah.
Records of events where people were
Exactly,
co-present.
because we have big councils that list everybody there. So that's another type of data that we can bring in.
I'm fascinated by this because in many ways it seems to me that you're solving a mystery. And you're exploring clues that you're finding, connecting the dots to solve that mystery. And I'm fascinated from the aspect of how the mapping, the network mapping that you do, one may be a literary context, one may be a historical context, but each of those contexts that you look at can create a different map. And I'm interested in how those overlaying of those maps allows you to answer the question mark next to a person. Because there is a part of this that's speculation and assigning a value to something.
Yeah, and for this period in history, we will, as a history, early medieval historians speculate a lot. We just have to make our best guess from the evidence we have, or reason it from pieces of evidence, scraps of evidence. But just to pick up on something you said in the early part of your question, the notion that you could, I actually looked at another piece by Contraini that was about schools, and that produced an entirely different network map. So layering those, which are two separate pieces of his scholarship, and it's all in his head, right? So You want to always download him and connect the things he knows. But it comes out in different patterns and different arrangements in different pieces. So it would be interesting to layer those. Quite often because the focus is different. And he's speaking about schools, he's speaking about centres in the other piece, and which were the most important schools in the period. And of course, scholars go to schools, but that's thinking about place and something a bit more fixed. I think I probably run out of time, right? So thank you very much for being so interested.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.